I want to start by telling you the moment I found out. Not how it began, not the years in between. The moment I found out. Because that is the moment everything before it changed shape. The way a photograph changes when someone tells you the person standing at the edge of it is not who you thought they were. I was 54 years old. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in March with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and a letter in my hand that had been sent to my address by mistake. It was addressed to a woman whose name I did not recognize. The return address was a town 40 miles from ours. I almost set it aside to give to the post later. I almost did not open it. But something made me open it. Something small and quiet and insistent that I have no name for even now. And when I read the first 3 lines, I understood that the letter had not come to me by mistake at all. Some things find you exactly when they are supposed to find you, even when the finding destroys something. Even when what it destroys had been the entire foundation of the life you believed you were living. The letter was from a woman named Margaret, and Margaret was writing to my husband Jacob about their son. Before I go any further, I need to stop and say something to you directly. More than 90% of the people watching this right now have not subscribed yet, and I understand that. You found this video somehow. Maybe you could not sleep. Maybe something in the title caught something in you that needed catching. But these are not just stories. They are the 30 years I lived without knowing. They are the letter on the kitchen table. They are everything that came after. If something in what I am saying is reaching you tonight, please subscribe before we go further. It is completely free. It keeps this community alive. And while you are here, tell me something in the comments. What is the one memory you find yourself returning to over and over again? I read every single word you write. Every one. Now I need to take you back. Because the moment at the kitchen table only means something if you understand what the 30 years before it looked like. And the 30 years before it looked, from the outside and very nearly from the inside, like a good life, like a real marriage, like a man and a woman who had built something together that was worth building. I married Jacob Yoder when I was 22 years old. He was 26. He was from a neighboring district, which meant he was known to my community, but not fully known. There was still some mystery to him, which in an Amish world where everyone has grown up inside everyone else's history is its own kind of rare. He was tall, quiet in the particular way that reads as depth rather than absence. He had a steadiness to him that I mistook for 30 years for honesty. I want you to remember that. I mistook his steadiness for honesty. I will come back to what it actually was. We were married in November. We moved to his family's farm, which he had taken over from his father 2 years earlier. We had 4 children in 7 years. We built the life that the community expected us to build, and we built it genuinely. I want to be clear about that. It did not feel like performance from the inside. The mornings were real. The meals were real. The winters when the heating stove in the kitchen was the warmest place in the world, and the children came and pressed against it like cats. That was real. The prayers were real. My love for him, for the man I believed he was, that was as real as anything I have ever felt. Jacob was a good father. I will not take that from him, even now, even after everything. He was patient with the children in the way that some men are naturally patient, without effort, without the tightness around the eyes that tells you patience is costing something. He taught our sons to farm with a care that went beyond instruction. He was teaching them how to pay attention to the land, how to read it, how to work with it rather than against it. He sat with our daughters in the evenings and listened to them in a way that many Amish fathers did not listen to daughters. He was present. That is the word. And presence, I have learned, is the most effective disguise a person can wear. Because when someone is present with you, truly present, you stop looking for what they might be hiding. You stop looking at all. You simply receive the presence and call it truth. Now I need to tell you something that I did not understand until years after the letter. Something that, once I understood it, made the previous 30 years rearrange themselves entirely. Jacob had never fully ended something before we began. I need you to hold that thought because I am going to come back to it, and when I do, the shape of everything I have told you so far will change. The first sign I did not recognize as a sign came about 4 years into our marriage. Jacob began making trips to a town 40 miles away that he explained as business-related to feed supplies and equipment. This was not unusual in itself. Amish men travel for business. They have suppliers and contacts and transactions that take them away from home for a day or two at a time. I packed him food for the road. I told the children Dot would be back by Thursday. I managed the farm in his absence and felt, if anything, a quiet competence in doing so, a reminder that I was capable of more than I was usually called upon to demonstrate. He always came back on time. He always brought something small, a particular kind of cheese the children liked, thread in a color I had mentioned needing. He was never cold when he returned, never distant, never showing the particular quality of guilt, which I now know I was too inexperienced in deception to recognize anyway. He came back the same man who had left. Or so I believed. Or so I was shown. The second sign came 7 years in. A woman approached me after church one Sunday, a woman from a district I did not know well, and she asked me if I was Jacob Yoder's wife. I said yes. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not read, and then she said she had thought so. And then she smiled and said nothing more and moved away into the crowd. I thought about that exchange for several days. I turned it over. I held it up to different lights. And then I put it down because I could not find an explanation for it that fit inside the life I was living. And when something does not fit, when you are 29 years old and have 3 children and a 4th coming, and a farm to manage, and a husband who comes home on time with cheese and thread, you put the unexplainable thing down and you go back to work. Because work is always there. Because work does not ask you to rearrange everything you know. I need to pause here and tell you something about Margaret. Because she is not a villain in this story, and I think it matters that you understand that before I tell you what I am about to tell you. Margaret was not from our community. She was from a community 2 districts over, a smaller and more isolated one, a community where the bishop's authority was more absolute, and the women's options were considerably fewer than even what I had. She had met Jacob before he met me. She had been with Jacob, in the full meaning of that phrase, before he came to our district and began courting me. And when I say she was not a villain, I mean that she was a woman who had been told something by a man she trusted and had believed it because she had no reason not to, and no means to verify it, and no community that would have helped her if she had tried. What Jacob had told Margaret, I learned this from the letters that followed, from the long and devastating correspondence that began that Tuesday morning in March and did not end for almost 2 years. What Jacob had told Margaret was that his situation had changed. He had told her that he was no longer with me. He had told her, and I want you to really hear this, that we had separated. That in the quiet, private way these things sometimes happen in Amish communities, where there is no legal divorce and no public announcement, but simply two people who stop living as husband and wife while maintaining the outward form of it for the sake of the community. He had told her that we were simply existing in the same house for the children, and that his real life, his real self, had moved toward her. He had told her this in the first year of our marriage. He had been telling her a version of this, with small adjustments, for the decades, for 30 years. She had believed him for 30 years. I had believed him for 30 years. 2 women, 1 man, 30 years. And the particular cruelty of it, the thing that I come back to again and again in the years since, is that neither of us was wrong to believe what we believed. We believed because we had been given no reason not to believe. We believed because the evidence available to us supported belief. We believed because Jacob had built 2 lives with the same steadiness, the same presence, the same quiet competence at being exactly what each of us needed him to be. Margaret had a son. He was 28 years old when the letter arrived. His name was Aaron, and he had Jacob's jaw and Jacob's way of standing, and the same particular quietness that I had spent 30 years calling depth. Margaret had raised him alone, mostly, with Jacob's periodic presence and periodic absence explained to Aaron as the necessary complications of a man with responsibilities in 2 districts. Aaron had grown up believing his father was a man of unusual obligation. He had grown up being told to be patient with the distance. He had grown up, I understood eventually, inside the same architecture of careful explanation that I had lived inside, where everything that might have been a question was given an answer just plausible enough to prevent further asking. Now I need to tell you what I did with the letter, because this is the part people always want to know, and it is the part I find hardest to explain, because the explanation requires you to understand something about who you are at 54 after 30 years inside one life. You do not explode. I think people imagine that you explode, that you pick up the letter and walk into the room where your husband is and put it down in front of him and become a woman from a different kind of story, loud and righteous and immediately clear about what you want. I did not do that. I sat at the kitchen table and I read the letter 4 more times. I drank the cold coffee. I looked out the window at the field where Jacob was working, a small figure at the far end of the south field, moving steadily the way he always moved. And I thought, how many times have I watched him from this window and believed I was watching the man I knew? I put the letter in my apron pocket. I made the midday meal. I called Jacob in from the field. I watched him wash his hands at the sink and sit down and bow his head for the blessing and eat the food I had made. I watched him the way you watch something when you are seeing it for the first time and also seeing it for the last time simultaneously. The way his hands moved, the way he chewed, the way he looked up and said the food was good. 30 years of meals, 30 years of this table, 30 years of believing that the man across from me was who he said he was. I did not show him the letter that day. I needed to understand first what I was holding before I let him know I was holding it. I had learned in 30 years of marriage that Jacob was very good at explanation, that he had a particular skill for taking a concerning thing and surrounding it with enough context and calm that the concerning thing became something else. I did not want to give him the opportunity to do that with this, so I waited. I wrote to Margaret. I told her who I was. I told her what I had found. I asked her to tell me everything. She told me everything. It took 3 months of letters. By the end of those 3 months, I knew the shape of the 30 years more clearly than I had ever known it while I was living inside it. I knew the town 40 miles away as well as I knew my own kitchen. I knew the small house where Margaret had raised Aaron. I knew the particular arrangement of absences and presences that Jacob had maintained across 3 decades with a logistical precision that, in another context, you might have called impressive. He had never missed a significant event in either life. He had been present for Margaret's difficult labor with Aaron and present for our harvest that same week. I still do not entirely understand how. I have stopped trying to understand how. The how is less important than the what. And the what was this. He had built 2 complete lives and inhabited both of them fully, and the women inside each life had believed completely in the life they were given, because he had been present enough in each one to make absence feel like logistics rather than deception. I confronted Jacob on a Sunday evening in June. The children were grown and gone by then. We were alone in the farmhouse for the first time in years, really alone, with the particular quiet of a house that has held many people and now holds only 2. I took the letters out and I put them on the table between us. I did not speak. I watched his face. And here is what I will tell you about Jacob's face in that moment, the thing I have turned over more times than I can count. He did not look surprised. He looked, and I have spent years finding the right word for this. He looked relieved, as if something he had been holding for a very long time had finally been put down, as if the unburdening was, for him, almost a kind of rest. He said, "I never knew how to end it, either of it." He said it quietly, without drama, the same way he said everything. He said, "I kept thinking it would resolve itself. I kept thinking something would happen that would make the decision for me." I said, 30 years, Jacob." He said, "I know." I said, "She has a son." He said, "I know that too." And the knowing, the fact that he had always known, the fact that he had held Aaron's existence in his mind for 28 years and come home to our table and bowed his head and given thanks, that is the part that sits in me still, like a stone that will not move. We did not stay married. I want you to know that clearly. There are people who ask, as if the answer might be anything else. We did not stay married. I left the farmhouse in the fall of that year, and I began the long, strange work of building a life at 54 that was entirely my own for the first time. That work was harder than I can tell you in one video, and more necessary than I have words for. Margaret and I have spoken. That is its own story, one I will tell another time. What I will say now is only this. She is not my enemy. She was not my rival. She was a woman in a different room of the same deception, and we have found, in the years since, a way of being in the world that acknowledges what we share without pretending it is simple. Aaron is a grown man who is working out what it means to be his father's son. I do not envy him that work. I respect him for doing it. Jacob is still alive. He lives on the farm. He goes to church on Sundays. He has, as far as I know, not built a third life. But I have stopped being the person who watches him from the window and calls what she sees the truth. That woman put down the cold coffee and folded the letter and made the midday meal, and then, eventually, when she was ready, she walked out of the story she had been given and began, slowly and imperfectly, and on entirely her own terms, to write a different one. If you have ever believed completely in something that turned out to be only half of a truth, I see you. If you have ever looked back at 30 years and tried to find the moments where you could have known and found instead only the moments where you were given just enough to keep believing, I see you. You were not foolish. You were not blind. You were a person who trusted the evidence you were given, and the failure was not in your trust. The failure was in the man who knew what you did not know and chose every single day for 30 years to keep knowing it alone. The steadiness I mistook for honesty was real. It was just in service of something I had not been permitted to see. And the life I built inside that steadiness, the children, the mornings, the winters by the stove, those were real too. The deception does not unmake what was real. It only adds to it. It only adds the weight of what was kept from me, which I now carry differently, not as shame, not as grief exactly, but as the particular knowledge of a woman who has looked at the full picture finally and found that she is still standing. Before you leave, I want to thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this. I know there are so many stories you could have spent this time with tonight, and you chose to spend it here, with me and Jacob and Margaret, and 30 years of a Tuesday morning in March that changed everything. That means more than I know how to say. But I want to be honest with you about something before you go. More than 90% of the people who watch these videos have still not subscribed. And if this story reached something in you tonight, if it touched a moment in your own life when you understood that what you were seeing was only part of what was true, I hope you will subscribe before you close this. It is free. It takes 1 second, and it means these stories keep being told, the ones that live too long in silence. Tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you the longest. Tell me if you have ever been handed a letter that rearranged everything, or simply tell me you were here. I read every word, every single one. Until next time, remember this. You were not wrong to believe. You were only given half the truth, and the other half was never yours to carry.